Hey students, today we're going to be talking about some of the programs that Franklin Delano Roosevelt would enact to combat the Great Depression. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, would be swept into office through a landslide victory over Hoover with 472 electoral college votes. From Hoover, FDR would be left the foreign debt knot and the Great Depression, both of which Hoover and the Republicans were relieved to pass on. FDR would campaign on a balanced budget and progressive reforms to help the forgotten man from greedy money changers. FDR would immediately take action when he came into the Oval Office. FDR would call for a nationwide banking holiday from March 6th to March 10th in 1933 to reopen the banks on sounder basis. He would also call in a special session of Congress to work out the actions of the first 100 days of his presidency. FDR would roll out the 3 R's of his New Deal: relief, recovery, and reform. FDR would firmly take the reins of the presidency and whip a newly elected Democratic Congress to pass forward his programs. The New Deal Congress would look at European programs to emulate unemployment insurance, old age insurance, minimum wage regulations, conservation of natural resources, and restrictions on child labor. Congress would move out at lightning speed to pass the Banking Relief Act of 1933, granting the president the power to regulate banking transactions and foreign exchange. FDR would move quickly with his new powers and order that all private holdings of gold to be surrendered to the Treasury Department in exchange for paper currency. This would be the start of the United States moving away from the gold standard. Congress would also pass a Glass-Steagall Banking Reform Act that would place an insurance on bank deposits up to $5,000. This would finally place a stop to a greater majority of bank runs. FDR entered office with an unemployment rate of about 25%, the highest the United States has seen. FDR and Congress would create the Civilian Conservation Corps, or CCC, with the passage of the Unemployment Relief Act of 1933 and employ about 3 million men to plant trees, firefight, flood control, and swamp drainage. Congress would also pass the Federal Emergency Relief Act, granting over $3 billion to be paid directly to people or to be paid out in public work projects. FDR would lead the charge to the creation of what would be nicknamed his alphabet agencies. One of the most notorious was the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, or AAA, that would pay farmers to farm less to artificially increase prices, and this would also lead to the slaughter of millions of livestock as well that would not lead to the market. This would be declared unconstitutional in 1936. Another far-reaching program was the National Recovery Administration, or NRA, where the hours of labor would be reduced to allow more workers to be hired, establish minimum wage laws and maximum hours worked, and would allow workers to collectively bargain with their employers. This program was popular to where businesses would display the logo of the NRA, an eagle, stating, "We do our part." This logo would also lead to the naming of a national football team, the Philadelphia Eagles. Eventually, the appeal of the NRA would fade for all those involved, stating that it was too much sacrifice on every front. The NRA would too also be declared unconstitutional in 1935. In 1933, Congress would set forth an endeavor that had not been taken in the United States. In the woods of mountainous Tennessee flows the Tennessee River that had eroded an area the size of England, and in it there was a home of 2 million poverty-stricken Americans. New dealers would seize this opportunity to create the Tennessee Valley Authority in 1933. The goal was to create dams that contain floods, generate hydroelectric power, provide employment, and to have reforestation. This would be hounded as socialist scheme, but FDR and the Democratic Congress would shake off this label. The TVA would provide full employment for many, and with it, cheap electricity. The crown jewel for FDR and the New Dealers would be the Social Security Act of 1935. This is one of the most complicated programs ever passed by Congress. The program would provide federal state unemployment insurance, old age insurance, and provide a funding mechanism through payroll tax on both employers and employees. By 1939, over 45 million Americans were eligible for Social Security benefits. Today, the program is still functioning, but has been significantly expanded on both on payments and costs. Detractors from FDR and the New Deal Congress would call them every name in the book, from crackpots to even accusing Roosevelt of being Jewish. But offensive language aside, the question of whether the New Deal really helped Americans was being raised. The only employer that grew from the New Deal greatly was the federal government. The bureaucracies created from FDR's alphabet soup grew the government far beyond what some thought it could be or wanted it to be. The idea of a balanced budget was thrown out the window, with the national debt doubling during FDR's first term. Businesses would complain that they would be able to cure the Great Depression if only government would step aside and allow the economy to recover naturally. The worst for FDR and the New Dealers was that the Great Depression was still lingering. Millions of Americans were still unemployed in 1939, and farmers were still overproducing, and in fact had produced more under FDR than Hoover. Alright, students, that's all for this chapter. We will talk more the next time that we are together. Until then, read your books, wash your hands, and do not touch your face and stay indoors.